Cool. Thank you so much for joining us tonight at the Elliott Bay Book Company. We're very, very excited to have Nathan Vass here to celebrate the release of The Lines That Make Us. This book has really been a wonderful phenomenon here at the store and elsewhere. People are really, really excited about it, myself included. And it's been absolutely flying off the shelves here at the store, which is cool. And I think Nathan's book has really resonated with so many people because there's just such a wonderful humanity to his writing. And I think that everything that we really love about riding the bus with Nathan really comes across in this book and in his writing. The stories that he gives us from his route are written with such empathy and compassion, and a deep love for the people and places that he serves on his routes, and a really deep love for Seattle, I think, that really comes through. So Nathan Vass is a photographer, film director, and two-time winner of Metro's Operator of the Month Award. His films and photography have been shown at festivals around the country, as well as the Henry Art Gallery and the Seattle Art Museum. His blog, which many of us are familiar with, The View from Nathan's Bus, has been featured on NPR, the Seattle Times, Slog, the Strangers News and Arts blog, KPLU, The Urbanist, and many others. And he's joined tonight by his friend Tom Eykemans, who's an award-winning designer and illustrator, and also designed Nathan's book. So these guys are going to come up here, we're going to talk, Nathan's going to do some reading, and then we'll have a Q&A, I think, towards the end, and we'll have books available, and Nathan will be signing in the back. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Nathan Vass.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Can you hear me? No. No. Hello.
Hello.
Okay, it's June 14th, 2017, a little bit after 3 p.m. There were people with dogs and people with children. The city ran around in circles, laughing in sunlight. It lay back on the grass with a book, or snoozed on the astroturf. We together, the world with a day off, for at least a few hours. I think you know the 1884 painting Un dimanche après-midi à l'île de la Grande Jatte by Georges de Seurat. I'm reminded of it every time I go to Cal Anderson Park, not simply because both involve parks. It's a depiction of the community at large coming out together, strangers and friends in pleasant company. The neighborhood's all here. It's inevitable I'll run into someone I know when strolling about the grounds. As well, the longer one scrutinizes that painting, it's the pointillist painting. The English title is Sunday Afternoon at the Island of Grand Jatte. It's very large, and there's a bunch of people at a park. The longer one scrutinizes that painting, the more oddities one notices. So, too, is it true of being on Capitol Hill's busiest park. With time, the generations are slowly becoming less tolerant of bigotry, and the haven the Hill has always been continues to offer space for the marginalized, as well as just the plain old quirky among us. The acrobats in my periphery doing things I don't have names for. The cast-off kids in a scruffy circle, wearing more paraphernalia than clothing, giving each other the love and acceptance they perhaps are not finding at home. I'm with my friend seated by the pool. It's a dirty green today, the sort of beauty you have to work with. Her natural blonde hair flutters in the warm breeze. We speak quietly. Another friend walks by, stroller in hand, and introduces her family. All is well. And then there are noises. Behind my friend, past her blonde wisps, beyond the pool, here's a man screaming into his phone. Big and tall, profane, shouting with his whole body. He happens to be African American. He is bald with John Lennon sunglasses, with an ex-athlete's build, dressed down in something like an Adidas tracksuit and jacket, mid-40s. He roared. And now here's another man, 30-something skinny, trim and open black denim jacket, coiffed mustache, bearded, approaching. He happened to be white. He went up to the angry man, softly, easily, hesitantly. I could see by their body language that they were strangers. The skinny fellow offered his extended arms in a hug. He nodded a little. The big man took a moment to understand. His roaring trailed off and he became still. They drew together, understanding. They swayed a little, like lovers, and backslapped a little like brothers, holding each other in the present moment quietly, in recognition of the deeper truths. I looked on in astonishment. What bravery, what intrepid nerve on the part of the man to offer that, and what courage for the other to receive it. Their silent peace was louder than all the noise. It may have been the most beautiful thing I've seen in a decade. I'm Nathan. Thank you for being here. I realized that the intro was mostly talking about me. This is Tom Eykemans. This is actually the Tom Eykemans show. He is the one who designed the book, who approached me, wanted to create it. Tom is very humble. I like to shove the spotlight onto other people. He likes to do that too, so there's going to be a little back and forth. But we're thinking about having a sort of a discussion up here where we hopefully address some of the thoughts you've been having if you've come across the book or things you're interested in. Maybe read some more stories. That was a story that is not in the book. I have some more stories I'd like to share from the book, as well as something, a story that I cannot put in the book or on the blog because it involves me breaking too many rules. But I want to share it with you because you guys came out here, and thank you. And you deserve something special that no one else is going to hear. So I'm going to hand it off to Tom to talk a little bit about why this book actually exists right now.
Thanks for that. And thanks first of all to Elliott Bay Books for hosting us tonight, and to everyone here for coming out. And we were talking earlier, but I feel like I should take a quiz and see, or a poll really, and see how many people took a bus or public transportation here tonight.
Oh, splendid.
Or a bicycle. Woo! All right, there we go. Good, good. So I'm going to just introduce myself briefly, but I was born in Seattle and have lived here for a long time, went to the University of Washington, and ended up working at the University of Washington Press for a long time, and I'm now at Lucia Marquand, which is a small art book publisher. So I've been in book publishing for about 12 years, but I've been riding the bus in Seattle for almost double that. And so when I'm not designing books, I'm often reading books or reading blogs, and yours is one that I've read for a long time. So you've had it for how long now?
I guess it's been 7 years. Yeah. I feel like I'm lying when I'm saying that. It's actually true. The time flies. Yeah.
And it always struck me as something that was so well written and so thoughtful, and so it just got to the core of kind of the humanity of Seattle in a way that I hadn't really found before, and always thought that it would make an excellent book project. It's something that I had kind of on the side pitched to book publishers without you even knowing.
Thank you, Tom.
And after a little bit of struggle with that, eventually there kind of came a time when there was an opportunity to collaborate on a project, and I reached out to you out of the blue and wanted to see if you were interested in working on a book. And I think right around the same time as when you were thinking about finding an agent and making a book yourself.
Yes, I had spent years. Okay, so I've been driving the bus for 11 years, and the blog has been alive for only 7 of those. The blog was not the impetus to drive the bus, but the other way around. I resisted writing a blog for a long time because I get more out of, this is going to sound obvious and trite, but I hope it's true for all of us. I get more out of living life than documenting life, and I would rather be out there in the world talking to people than writing about it. But friends of mine were very enthusiastic in saying you have to share these stories. Everybody always has a bus story, and when you're a bus driver you have a disproportionate amount of them, and they're fun to share. And I realized that I was just making a bunch of lazy excuses for not writing a blog, and just got down to it. And I always thought that it would be something that my friends would look at to figure out what I'm doing when I'm working, and that there was no expectation of this taking off or becoming a larger thing. My training is in cinematography and photography, and it's funny to me that it's the bus stuff that has been by far the most successful material.
Well, I think, like what you said, in that everybody has a bus story, which is absolutely true, and I have many, and I've told you some, and you laugh politely, because all of yours are so much better.
That's not true.
But I think it's your enthusiasm and your insights that carry through your stories, that they're not just stories about a funny thing you saw on the bus. They're that, but then they're more, and you really get at the core of things in a way that's really unique. And so when we first started to conceive the project, we really had no idea what we were getting into. It started out as more like a zine kind of format. We were talking about printing maybe 50 copies.
Yes, and I should interrupt by saying that while this was happening, I had already spent a couple of years trying to get this published in New York. I would come to this very bookstore and pull off comparable titles off the shelves, trying to find the agent, in the front to contact and so on. And I was running into a lot of walls where there is not currently a optimistic bus driver anthology storybook in existence, and it's very hard to convince people of the commercial viability of that. There's an author who wrote, Jean Auel, I believe, who wrote those Clan of the Cave Bear series. Yeah, before those came out, there was no such thing as a Neanderthal romance, and she got rejected by every house in New York. Trying to get those out until somebody took a chance on Neanderthal romances, and now there's this whole big series. And not to compare myself to her writing or to imply that this is in any way great stuff, I was running into that similar thing and getting rejected by all kinds of people. Finally was able to get an agent in New York who he took on the duty of getting rejected by all the publishers instead of me, and that was very nice. But still, it wasn't going places.
Well, Jean Auel rejected me, so I couldn't design her Cave Bear books.
And it's because of those rejections, I'm sorry, Tom. It's because of those rejections that we felt comfortable going ahead with something that was technically within the purview of what my agent should have been doing. We asked him, is it okay if we make a little zine that'll be available locally? And of course he said yes, because he thought it would have no impact. And how perfect that my contract with my lovely agent has expired and we were able to go forward with this. I feel good about working on art projects when it's a collaboration with people I care about. That resonates with me more than how big it is or how popular it is. And it's a pleasant surprise that this has turned out to be both of those things. Anyways.
And I think I'll just say real briefly and then let you read another story, but those early beginnings of thinking of it as a kind of scrappy creative collaboration with people who like each other and want to work on something that's kind of cool and new and unique kind of worked its way into the final product, where I'm sure you've noticed by now it's got these funky flaps. It's got photos worked in an interesting way. The text is playful, and it definitely has more of a designy kind of angle to it that was really exciting to me to bring to this project in a way that I don't think would have been possible if you'd gone to a larger publisher.
Yeah, and coming from a visual design background or a directing and photography background myself, I love that we're pulling this a little more into it's not a coffee table book, but we're sort of pulling it into coffee table book territory by incorporating the non-standard format of the cover and the photographs. And yeah, I'm happy that those are there. Just to briefly say a word on the photos, I shot them all. They're all shot on film. I have a real attachment to shooting on film. But I spend a lot of time thinking about what picture goes with which story when I'm posting on the blog. Often it's not a bus, and it's not like something that's literally divinable while reading the story, but I hope that the photo expands how people think a little bit and makes them think about the story a little bit differently than just this guy was on the bus and so is this other guy and they're nice to each other. Okay, I want to tell you guys this story that's not on the blog because that's kind of exciting. So, I'm driving the 49, no surprise there. It's one of those nights where there's a large construction situation in the U District and it's making it so all the 49s are late, and you have that inevitable situation we all know where there's two buses of the same route right behind one another. And I'm the second bus. And when I'm the second bus, I like to be helpful to the first bus, because you know how the first bus gets really crowded, and I'm trying to be useful and be like, look, here I am, please get on my bus, the bus is empty. I don't know why people always go for the first bus in situations like that. It's all about the second bus, no one's ever on it, there's lots of places to sprawl out, and usually you get there at the same time. Anyway, so I'm the second bus, we're doing the 49, we're going all the way down Broadway, and nobody gets on my bus. And then we go through downtown, it's nighttime, so I'm turning into the number 7, and incredibly, nobody gets on the bus the entire way through downtown. This has to be the first time I've ever driven a 7 through downtown, had 0 passengers. And I have mixed feelings about that. I kind of, I work this job because I enjoy talking to people. But whatever, it's very easy and pleasant. We get to 3rd and Main, and the 7 that's in front of me parks, and the driver runs back to me with a passenger in tow. And this driver's name is Aaron, and like me, he is enthusiastic and friendly, but he's also new, and he doesn't know the city quite as well. And he says, Nathan, can you help me with this passenger who wants to go somewhere and I don't know where it is? The passenger is younger, probably in her 40s, Vietnamese woman who's very petite and small and does not speak a word of English, not even key phrases. There's a 100% language barrier here, and she's holding out her ID card, and I can see by the address on it that it's in West Seattle, but I don't know where in West Seattle. There's 3 routes that go from downtown to West Seattle at this time of night. Which one is it? I don't want to lead her out of the way. Also, we're at 3rd and Main, where only one of those buses goes to West Seattle, the 21. Is that the one she wants, or is it one of the other ones? How are we going to figure this out? And we're just kind of standing there looking at each other, because there's not too much we can do. And then I remember that what does cross over between Vietnamese and English is that the numbers are the same. And I give her a pen and a piece of paper, and she writes down the 120. And I think, okay, great, she needs the 120, how fantastic. That doesn't stop where we are, though. We're at 3rd and Main, and at the time of this story, the closest 120 stop was 2nd and Columbia. How am I going to explain to this person how to get over there? We sort of stand there and stare at each other a little bit longer, and finally Aaron, the other bus driver, is like, okay, I'm gonna go now, because I have this other bus to drive, there's people on it. Can you figure this out? And I say, sure. And so then it's just me and this nice person who doesn't speak English, standing there and wanting my assistance, and I'm disappointed because I'm worried I'm not gonna be able to give any. It won't help to call the coordinator, because that type of stuff takes too long. It's the middle of the night, and she is very, very terrified, because we're at 3rd and Main, and it looks scarier than it is. And also, it is kind of scary. And you know how when you're in a new city where you don't speak the language, everything's larger, it's more terrifying, and she doesn't know where anything is. How am I going to explain how to get from 3rd and Main to 2nd and Columbia? I can't say, walk this direction, for 6 blocks, and then turn this. I think we've all gotten lost in other countries when people have given us directions like that. And also there's the angled nature of the streets where they all bend at Yesler, and that might be confusing. Also, it would not be helpful she can't read the names of the streets. And I'm thinking about all this, and I'm showing her this little tiny passenger map of Seattle and trying to point to these 2 different places, and it's not working. And then I realize there's nobody on my bus. I could just drive her over to 2nd and Columbia. And so I changed the sign so that it's, so we're incognito, it says to terminal. What does that mean? And I try to gesture to her with my hands, to get on the bus because I'll take you to 2nd at Columbia. And that's sort of a complex thing to say with only 2 of your hands. But I'm able to convince her to get on the bus. And we get on the bus and I turn the lights off or something, and we drive over to 2nd and Columbia. And when we get to 2nd and Columbia, and I open the doors, I get off with her, and she steps off and notices the bus stop sign that says 120 on it. She starts heaving with tears of gratitude, and throws out her arms and gives me the most enveloping and intense, beautiful hug I have ever received. And we sort of take a step back mid-hug to look at each other's eyes, trying to communicate even though we don't have any words, and I'm saying, stuff like thank you for this positive, thank you. And she's saying stuff that might be similar. And I can see the specificity of the expression in her eyes. She is saying to me, I can sense that she's aware of two things. I'm not supposed to do this, but I did do it, and this is going to be very helpful. And I can see that she's thinking, my understanding of the universe is growing because I was not aware that there were strangers who could be this nice. She knew that I was not supposed to do this. And we hugged more because neither one of us had words to say, and some guy asked me bus questions, but I didn't listen because I was paying too much, I was too busy hugging this person. And finally, I got on the bus and drove away kind of a little bit too quickly to get back to where I was supposed to be on Rainier Avenue. And I did not expect to see her again. A week later, I'm driving the 49, totally unrelated part of the city. I'm over at Broadway, and I call it Broadway and Harrison. When I trained on the 49, the southbound stop is at Broadway and Republican, and this old-timer driver, I was sitting in the chat seat watching the driver, studying and learning the route, and the driver called it out as, "This is Broadway and Harrison." And I said, isn't that Republican Street? And he's like, I don't really like to say that word out loud.
And so, that fellow has long since retired, but I continue that. And that is why I say this is Broadway and Harrison, because I don't want to propagate, the wrong ideas here, with all due respect. So we're at Broadway and Harrison, and who's there at the bus stop? Yes, of course, it's this woman who I've never seen before, except the other night, all the way over at 3rd and Main. Here she is, carrying 2 extremely large white bags, and plastic bags. And she gets on, and even before I pull up to finish opening the doors, she's recognized that it's me. She just, blows up with excitement, so do I. And she runs onto the bus and gives me the second most enveloping and amazing hug I've ever received. And she's carrying 2 very large, one of these, I can see that it's takeout from a restaurant, and she gives me one of them. And it's from a pho restaurant, but it isn't just the noodles and broth. She must have been hooking up her family or something, because it's the noodles and the broth, and then the noodles and the broth, and then other stuff that I can't recognize that looks great. And the puff pastry that those of us who eat pho know generally comes from Pho Tan Brothers. Not all the pho places have it. Only Pho Tan Brothers has the critical the puff pastry. You gotta have it. And we're doing this second greatest hug ever, and totally interrupting the bus service, but whatever, this is very important. And we continue driving, and I drop her off at 3rd and Columbia, where that bus stop is. And I think to myself, I really want to thank this person properly. For some reason, I feel like I need to express gratitude to her just as much as she felt towards me. So I go onto Google Translate, and I type up a little paragraph of, thank you, thank you, thank you, and have it translated into Vietnamese. And I'm sure half of it's totally wrong, because any of us who speaks more than one language, it's very amusing to go on Google Translate. But it's the best I can do, and I copy down all the little accent marks that the Vietnamese language requires. And I take this handwritten note over to the Pho Tan Brothers that's closest to, there's only one Pho Tan Brothers anywhere near the vicinity of Broadway and Harrison and or Republican. So I go over there and I walk in there and I say, is there a person who looks like this who works here? And they say no, and I turn to walk out. As I'm walking out, I look down a hallway that offers a view of the kitchen. While I'm turning my head to look down the hallway to the kitchen, there's a person turning her head to look up the hallway. Is it her? Yes, it's her. She explodes. Do we have the 3rd most amazing hug in the history of the universe? Yes. And she explains to her manager probably this narrative with a lot of excitement. I give her the note, which she laughs about because I'm sure half of the thing is wrong, but she appreciates the sentiment. And I thought to myself, especially in those moments of being on 2nd and Columbia that night,
it was totally worth it for me to sign up to be a bus driver for 10 years for this moment so that I could reinforce this person's positive perspective on the world. There's an interview at the beginning of this book with me by Paul Constant, where Paul Constant asks me, do I think the world is a good place? And I'm not sure that it matters what the answer to that is. It helps if people think that the world is a good place, because if they think it's a good place, they'll make an effort. It doesn't matter if it's a good place, but if people are trying and believing and hoping, of course things will get better. So that's the end of that story. I haven't seen her again. Thank you.
So the end of that story makes me think of a question which I
Please.
think everybody's curious about, which is that you bring this kind of unrelenting positivity to all of your stories and your interactions and your writing, your photography, your filmmaking, everything. How do you maintain that? How do you bring it to every new situation, every new interaction? Is it something that you consciously do, or is it just you?
So in answering that, I feel like I'm just going to have suppositions because I'm not actually sure where this positivity comes from. I have passengers ask me that sometimes, especially when I'm doing the 7. A couple of kids will come up and say, why are you so happy all the time? Or I'll be doing like a split shift and I'll drive someone to work in the morning and then I'll see them again in the afternoon driving them home. They'll think I'll have driven all day and they'll say, wow, you're still smiling. I just worked 8 hours. And in answering that, I might say that, I don't have a clever answer. I might say that growing up, there was always an emphasis on generating happiness from within. That way you can control it a little more. You're not dependent on if you got some ice cream or if there, things outside your control. Also, there's so much value in terms of how we perceive things. We can choose to be angry about something. We make a decision to search for the positive. And when you hone that muscle a lot, maybe it becomes easier to execute. But again, honestly, I'm not really sure. Maybe if I found out exactly what it was, it would be this like little whisper of a flame that would go out and I would lose it. But I'm really thankful, not just to have this job, but to like the job. There was something else I was going to... Okay, so yeah, I was talking to my aunt, and I was asking my aunt, who grew up in California and now lives in Mexico, what was different about being a teenager in the 60s and 70s as opposed to the 90s. And she was saying that, yes, the world seemed smaller at the time because there was less of a 24-hour news cycle and international news available. It also seemed safer. It wasn't actually safer. All the same stuff was going on, but you didn't know about it. And you had this different, your conception of the world had more to do with your day-to-day interactions as opposed to what's going on in Time magazine. I don't want to devalue being aware of what's going on in our world. That would be ridiculous. But I do want to emphasize that yeah, it's important to focus on little, tiny, small, positive stuff. Victor Hugo said, there are no small things. And I realize this is a run-on answer, Tom, I'm sorry, but I want to add one more element. Which is, I think as artists, you try to fill a void when you notice an absence of something in the cultural discussion or in art, and you try to fill it. What I notice a lack of, this is no surprise, but there's not, you don't have easy access to positive, wonderful things that are happening on a day-to-day scale in the way that you have excellent access to really good information about terrible things that are happening. And the blog was an attempt to like create an online repository of, okay, here's some stuff that maybe is worth focusing on. There are studies that indicate that going online doesn't make you happier. It generally contributes other things like anxiety and self-esteem stuff. Do terrible things on my bus happen? Yeah, but I tend not to write about them too much. One, because it takes me a while to understand them sometimes, so I don't feel qualified to write about them or talk about them immediately. But also, they don't happen very often. If you're putting out this positive energy, yes, there's a few days out of the year that are spectacularly challenging, and then the rest of it is pretty good. And I say this having driven the 7 at night for 4 years in a row, and you can achieve a sort of consistency, and that's what I aim for. I'm not perfect at it, but I admire the bus drivers that have, everybody can be in a really good mood for a short time and be like really patient and wonderful and accepting and inclusive, but I admire the drivers who have been able to sustain that for the duration, and that's what I try to do. I'm done.
The story that you just told, like, obviously couldn't be published or shared otherwise for a few different reasons. But in selecting the stories from this book, was there a rationale or a reason that you chose certain stories or put them in a certain order?
So while we were talking about this zine that was going to be like a pamphlet of maybe a couple stories.
I think that was a way for us not to like commit to it too much.
Exactly,
Like, it's just a
yeah.
zine.
It's just a zine. So I picked out like 60 stories.
This is true.
And the act of whittling those 60 stories down into 30 stories was extremely painful. There are thousands of stories on the blog, and these are not necessarily the, like, I would hesitate to call them the best ones. I was going for something more personal. What are the ones that are most resonant to me as a reader? And what are the moments that were most meaningful to me as a driver? And maybe that will cross over some way to the reader. I want this to be sort of an armchair experience where you're at your home and you're safe and you don't have to ride the bus in the middle of the night to experience these absolutely awesome things that mean a lot to me. And some of the stories are more personal, and I wasn't expecting the book to be huge. And for me, it's huge. I'm small. And if I had known the book was going to be would land as well as it has, I might have insisted on some more stories. But I guess that's what the next volume is for, if we ever choose to go that route.
Want to read another one?
I would love to read another one. Give me a warm, hot moment.
I did kind of feel like I was asking you to kill your own children when picking the stories. That sounds really awful.
It's a difficult thing to
that
do.
Was the atmosphere at the time.
It's hard to kill children, especially your own.
Yeah.
Let's do this. So sometimes I tell stories at a local storytelling thing. It's called Fresh Ground Stories, and it's really fabulous. And when you tell stories there, of course the stories have to be true, but you're not allowed to use notes. You have to memorize everything. This feels like cheating, and I feel very relaxed, and thank you for, tolerating me like not having memorized every single word of this. It's August 13th, 2017. It's very, very late at night. She looked apprehensive. I probably did too. The clock had just struck midnight, and angry voices boomed in our periphery. She was out there, waiting for the bus in a white and yellow summer dress, breezy, perhaps wishing there was someone around, anybody, besides this angry, yelling man approaching. I was inside my darkened bus, waking up disoriented from a short nap. The shift was almost done, and it had been a breeze, but it's never over till it's over. Bus drivers sometimes ride my bus to get a feel for the night 7, different ways of handling it. Certain passenger friends call a ride on my 7 bus therapy, while some drivers have dubbed it the Nathan Vass refresher course. I doubt it qualifies for that lofty moniker. I prefer calling it my office hours, but I did have an evening where 3 operators, unbeknownst to each other, all came out to ride the last half of my shift. I was telling them it's never over until it's completely over, till you've parked the bus on the lane inside the yard. You could be 100 feet away from home base and it could still all fall apart. As it happened, we were about 100 feet away from home base, these drivers and I, wrapping up the shift, when, wouldn't you know it, a woman came running out of the bushes with blood on her hands and waist, waving her arms and asking us for assistance with her boyfriend who had been stabbing her. It's never over till it's over. We called for help and she got the assistance she needed. I try not to offer relationship advice to random strangers, but given the circumstances, you might think about dumping this guy, I said. Oh God, yes, she said. It's with these thoughts that I stood and stretched out of my nap. Some real angry voices out there. I sighed. It didn't matter how carefree the day had been. In its last minutes, you still might have to step up, summon your better angels, and steer the moment as best you can. I opened the door and turned on the interior lights. Summer Dress and I made nervous contact, neither one of us quite sure what was transpiring. She was still standing out there. I was standing by the fare box as a belligerent voice came closer. Hi, I said to her with kind eyes. Any friendly stranger is a friend, not a stranger, in an intense situation. Hey, she replied, cute blue eyes, short, with headphones she knew not to be listening to right now. Don't nobody talk to me that way, said a tall man in dark clothes and a beanie, a bass-inflected gravel rasp to his throaty din. It sounded vaguely familiar. Where have I heard that voice before? Ah, yes. I put it together right before I saw his face. Marcus loomed out of the shadows, walking down from the bus behind me. Boy, does it ever pay off to know a man's name. You never know when you'll see someone again, or how. The genial history he and I have paid off in spades now. The present instantly diffused, and the girl's eyes lit up with surprise, comfort, and relaxation as I said in a friendly tone just a tad quieter than normal. Hey, Marcus. Pause. You don't sound too happy. He exhaled, calming down. No, man. This guy tried to tell me to take my shit and get off the bus. You can always hang out on my bus. I know, but this guy's just... ... I'm sorry to hear it, dude. You can always hang out in here. The young lady was searching her purse for change. She looked up at him, saying, Oh, you go ahead. I think Marcus realized then that he was scaring people. He looked at her now, over the rims of his wire-frame glasses, not lasciviously, that's not, thank you, not a word I often have occasion to use. Not that, but how a father looks at girls his daughter's age, with caring. I love watching people think. He deflated further back to his normal self and said, Oh no, I always let ladies go first. He smiled and she returned the same, feeling the tension slack loose. I said, So he was giving you some attitude? Marcus didn't even need to vent. I'm okay, he said warily. It's just too hot for all that. Yeah, we gotta keep it low-key. Tone of voice, choice of words. I've asked hundreds of people, including Marcus himself, to step off the bus at various ends of the line. I've never told them to, though. And I've definitely never used the words he quoted the other brand new driver as saying. If I told all those people to take their shit and get off my bus, I don't think I would even be alive. Instead, I have the respect of friends in more corners of society than I ever could have imagined, corners I never knew existed. Seeing the young woman realize she could relax, that everything was okay, that for some reason this driver knew this guy by name and they could talk things down, I didn't know that would be the highlight of my night. It's never over till it's over.
Can you talk a little bit about the decision we made to include your photography in the book and how it kind of interrupts each chapter?
Yes. If there's no pictures in this book, it becomes a little more situated in the context of short story fiction. And I want to emphasize veracity. I want to emphasize the fact that, to my memory, everything in here is true. Is memory fallible? Yes, of course. But I make a concerted effort to have everything in here be accurate. There are so many blog stories I've not written and cannot write because I don't remember exactly what they were saying. So quickly you lose snippets of the conversation because something else interesting happens before you get to a red light where you can write stuff down, or before you get to the terminal. And I don't want to give fictionalized versions of the stuff I encounter because I don't think that has a lot of value. I want to share exactly, as best as I, flawed human remembering person can, what took place because it resonated with me. Including photos in here is in the tradition of me like being a photographer and stuff, and art making is important, and you can communicate stuff through images that you can't through words, so on and so forth. But also to be like, okay, these buses exist, here are some images, these people also exist, we have some portraits, and I want it to be known that it's true. As far as remembering the dialogue, this is something I get asked about from time to time. So the largest existing document of the same people speaking are the Watergate tapes. And aside from their obvious historical value, they have a lot of linguistic value. And they were transcribed not too terribly long ago by people. Lyndon B. Johnson also recorded a lot of his stuff. And those have also been transcribed, but they don't have linguistic value to read because the people who transcribe them only care about the historical content, and they ignore, like, they smooth out the way people spoke. Lyndon B. had a habit of speaking very differently depending on who he was talking to. He would break out this southern twang and start talking about farmland, or he would talk to, in a completely different way, to the manager of the Brooklyn Zoo. And you don't get any of that looking at the transcripts for the Lyndon B. tapes. You do get it looking at the Nixon tapes. And maybe there's been a historical desire to preserve the veracity of the way Nixon and his cronies spoke because they were so profane. The Lyndon B. administration was a little less colorful in their language choices. And taking a cue from those transcripts, I like to preserve exactly what people have said. And usually this involves, as soon as the person leaves, or as soon as I get to the terminal, I like start scribbling stuff down, and another bus driver will come over to me like, you know, wanting to have a conversation. I'll be like, I'm sorry, I can't talk right now. I'm trying to remember everything. And it's easy for me to remember what I said, but it's working back what they said, usually starting from the last stuff we said and working backwards. Gets to be a pretty easy habit, but I can't do it if I'm having a conversation with more than one person. That's why all the stories in here are only with one other human being. And I wanted to feel truthful, and so the pictures sort of tie into that. And also, I knew that if we were to go to New York with this, I don't think they would want pictures because that's such a weird thing to do in a short story book.
I think in this case, they really help set the tone. The fact that they're all black and white, even though you shoot in color as well, kind of creates this aesthetic that the words can sit in. I feel like that is really important to the book. And it kind of also reflects the climate in Seattle in general.
Yeah.
So, maybe not the last few days, but it kind of ended up working out together.
I also want to include the pictures because it introduces imagery that's consistent with the perspective in the book. I want to sort of normalize images of groups of people that people might have prejudices about in a positive context. And if I'm only doing that in words, we're asking the reader to take an extra leap imagining things visually. If we offer visuals as well, maybe that's a little more constructive. I don't know. Another one? Sure. Okay. Do you guys want something that is sort of really heartwarming, just a little heartwarming, or extremely heavy?
Heavy.
Heavy. Great. Great. Okay. This is fairly new. It's May 9th of 2018. Stories come out slowly sometimes, awkwardly. They belch and burp their way forth. This young man approached the bus's crowded interior with a hesitance, standing by me as I drove, no reason given. I thought he was about to jump off. He wasn't. He just watched me, keeping to the side, while I greeted and fared the people well, wrapping the wheel around corners, accents and smiles bouncing off me as I registered his gaze nearby. What was he thinking beneath that knit beanie? Behind the dirty off-gray sweatshirt with the high school logo, the army camo fatigues tied round at the bottom, the better to display his basketball socks and shoes. Finally, I just went for it. How's it been going? It's cool, he replied, in a monotone I took to be standard issue emotionless male adolescent, but which quickly revealed itself to be something more. I was just in this accident, though. The driver died. Ah, I said. He was young. Should a high schooler know the face of death this well? I'm so sorry. Somebody you knew? I wasn't looking at his face, but I felt like I was, hearing the naked grit in his voice. My best friend. Ah, I moaned again. I am so sorry. I know how that feels. And he was a good guy, too. He had a job. Just turned 26. He the type of guy who'd give you his last $5, you know? I breathed in, feeling the words travel down, the memories behind them, as they slid to the pit of my stomach. Let yourself go there, I thought. A positive worldview should be able to tolerate anything. What is optimism? Optimism is being comfortable looking at truth, even if it's negative. I don't understand how this world works, but I like living here. Life may be unfair, but people don't have to be. What are we here for if not to help our fellow man through a spot of hardship? I felt his burden too, and tried to share it with words. Oh my gosh, that's heavy, I said. I know what you mean, though. It's the best people I know that die young. I don't understand it. Yeah. I guess all we can do is keep that person's good spirit alive. Let him live through our actions. I meant it, but it sounded false. The comforts you're not ready to hear in the days of after. We were facing the mystery around which religions are built, ideologies and philosophies, the one question no amount of millennia can conclusively answer. Why do bad things happen to good people? It's the humanized condensation of yet a larger query. You've asked it, even if you don't think you have. Why does order in the universe seem present sometimes and absent at others? Most human thought stems from this question, and it is our nature to ask it. No matter how smartly the old universe keeps its secrets, we can never know, are not allowed to know, and yet. Sure, he was a husky macho man of a teenager, but I knew the question lived in his mind also, the doubt. I found myself saying, yeah, because I used to think, when I was little, if you're a good person, then you're going to live a long time. And that just ain't true at all. It's almost like the opposite, he murmured, or something. Do actions have consequences? I think when it's your time, it's your time. That's him talking. Yeah, that makes sense, I nodded again. I'll take this suggestion of order, even if I can't comprehend it. That makes sense. Maybe it's not about consequences. Maybe it's acting qua acting for the sake of itself, how it makes you feel, for the good it does you and others. Maybe that is its own reward. I mused. The thing is, I still want to be a good dude. Even if I don't live a long time, I want to feel good about the stuff I do in this life, And he says, yeah, I think it's like God giving me a second chance. Yeah, an opportunity. I looked at his cast. How's your hand? He mentioned pain pills, numbness, 2 more months of the cast. I said something about how that's better than a wheelchair. He said, yeah. He opened up as the bus emptied out. Just us now. There were 3 others in the car, he explained. His best friend, his girlfriend, and his best friend's girlfriend. One girl broke both her legs, the other her ribs. His friend, the driver, gone. It went unspoken who made out the best. Our friend's lasting problem is not a physical injury, but a psychological one. A roiling storm he will likely never manage to convey to others who haven't also experienced similar catastrophes. He will know the force of the questions above with a slamming weight unique to him, and the resulting loneliness will inform his every thought and action to a degree even he won't be able to wrap his mind around. It will be this haze, the invisible suffering that gives him the long view, but keeps him forever distant. There's a type of grief where you have no tears left. You can't cry, you've run out. It sounds like you don't care, but you're just hoarse from a passion too big for your voice. That's where our boy was. We were at the terminal, standing outside the bus now. I listened as he reflected. We were going to the Paradise restaurant, just gonna get something to eat. I guess he went to the real Paradise. Pause. And he was just 26, such a good guy. Like I said, he the type he'd give you his last $5 if he needed it. And I say, that's such a good age too. I mean, you're all done with school, you're a new adult, finally doing something with your life, got all kinds of possibilities. And he says, dude, yeah, man, I have nightmares every night. We used to see each other every day. Now it's like this? There's not much you can say after that. We ended on a note of him saying God bless, us expressing genuine thankfulness at being alive. I watched him stalk away, another young man in a beanie, doing his best at the extraordinarily challenged and seemingly nigh impossible game we call living life. What cures you from the knowledge of the shape of the void? What pulls you back? Will there be a day with enough hindsight behind it, when a sunrise is a sunrise again, and the questions don't need answers anymore? One day he will know, and I think he will smile.
I think I should have saved my question about positivity for this one. One thing I wanted to ask about is that in your writing, you confront topics of race and gender, class, homelessness, sexuality, youth, old age, everything. And how do you approach these like very disparate topics and identities that you might not have yourself?
It's a great question to ask. I hope it occurs to readers because it's important to think about. It would be accurate to say that I'm not qualified to write about experiences within the African American or African communities. I am qualified to write about experiences I have with the African or African American communities or any other communities. The people I spend the most time with while I'm awake is not my friends or my family, but the passengers on the number 7. And having spent a fair amount of time in that community, I feel I should backtrack and add that being born in South Central LA and spending your formative years in an environment where everyone around you is a person of color predisposes you to feel most comfortable in an environment where everyone around you is a person of color. There are a lot of consistency between Rainier Valley, Southeast Seattle, and South Central Los Angeles. And I feel a sense of ease at being myself when I'm out there that may be conducive in some sort of subtle, unspoken way that leads to all kinds of nice interactions happening. And I feel like it's important to share these interactions, especially with other friends of mine who may not have the opportunities to be aware of exactly how awesome these communities are, but also what normalcy looks like. There's a lot of posts on my blog that involve specifically young Black American men doing like kind of normal, nice things, such as being polite or having conversations. And to me, those happen all the time. And they happen with such frequency, I can never hope to write about all of them on the blog, nor do I really feel the need to. But for every one of those types of stories that's on the blog, there's just an avalanche of very similar interactions that take place on my bus. And I think we can easily agree that there is disproportionate amounts of negative or otherwise narrow portrayals of certain communities of color, and that I feel an obligation as an artist to try to do something about that by addressing the void, by offering some positive stuff of these young guys being not just nice or respectful or whatever, but like even like boring or rude, but not criminals. Am I the most qualified person to be doing this work? No. Am I able to do this work because I'm in a unique position? Yes. And I hope to be able to contribute a small part of that because I have to. It's what we said before about you, the artist, notices a void in the culture, and you just have this intense desire to fill it, and if you can fill it, I'm going to do it. Does that answer a little bit?
Yes. I think related to that, you kind of have this street level, literally view of Seattle, like of the different parts of Seattle. Now that you're driving a couple different routes, you're kind of getting a real sense of different communities within Seattle, but you're also seeing things change as we've all seen Seattle change over the past decade or so. How do you feel like, well, I guess the short version is, what do you think is Seattle changing so much, so quickly from the bus?
Real estate has taken over weather and being the most common subject in our discussion. There is a what seem like self-imposed cultural enclaves developing and the way the city is divided. That reminds me of LA in a negative way, where North Seattle involves this type of attitude disproportionately, and South Seattle involves this type of camaraderie. I'm not thrilled by it. We all have different conceptions of what the city is based on who we spend time with and where we go. Mine is disproportionately having to do with South Seattle and the working class and low income neighborhoods in certain areas of this city. To me, that's normal, so my perspective might be skewed. When I do go out into the rest of the city, though, yeah, it is kind of disappointing to notice how hard it is to live. I was having a conversation with someone recently about how in cinema, most films are either about people who are spectacularly rich or totally destitute. And there's not many movies about people who drive Honda Civics. And that might be because it's getting harder and harder to be somebody who drives a Honda Civic. If you're trying to find a place to live in Seattle, often you make slightly too much money, but not enough to pay rent in the neighborhood you want to live. And there, you start to notice more, what's the way to say this? When I drive the 7, for example, at about 10 p.m., there's sort of a rush hour echo. Not in cars, but in passengers. There's this slight surge of people getting on the bus because it's all the people getting off of swing shift jobs who wash dishes and stuff and work security. When I'm driving the 5, which is what I'm doing now, for better or worse, we can talk about why I'm doing it in a second, there isn't anyone on Greenwood who washes dishes. So at 10 p.m., the bus is completely deserted, and that makes me sad. How come everybody who washes dishes has to live over here? And why is, it's, I'm rambling. You understand where I'm coming from. Yeah.
Well, I think if you wanted to read one more story, and then after that we could open it up to questions from the audience.
Yes, I want to hear all your questions, and before I read the story, while you're thinking about questions to ask, I want to add that I am a bus driver, and there's no question you can ask that I have not already heard in much more outrageous and extreme terms. So please don't feel shy, and I want to hear what you guys are thinking about. And don't be afraid to ask, well, please be nice, but don't be afraid to ask questions about challenging topics. Okay, so what we can choose between here, let's just do this. Okay, it's November 2013, November 5th. We're getting on into the evening. My last passenger of the night is an older African-American gentleman. Often he can be seen sitting on the sidewalk outside Bartell's at 3rd and Union. This would be the northeast corner. He was there earlier and is now getting on at Pine southbound. I imagine he didn't find quite what he was looking for at the open-air marketplace that is 3rd and Pine. It's time for him to check out the other drug bazaar, 3rd and James. Arthur Conan Doyle once noted that worlds of considerable complexity and size can coexist in the same physical space with relative invisibility to each other. Different levels of life swirl around us as we, unbeknownst, drift through. These layered milieus often take form in the eyes of others only through instant. While in some cities different standards of behavior are more markedly relegated by geography, Seattle is a touch more enthusiastic in fulfilling the American notion of the melting pot. Here, it is possible to walk through the southeast corner of 3rd and Pine in fancy heels with shopping bags in hand without knocking the balance of worlds out of order. That this doesn't happen 100% of the time is one of the great urban tragedies. Though, having said that, just yesterday I watched a collage of dealers and shakers at the aforementioned corner. They parted like the Red Sea for 2 older European seniors who passed through none the wiser. That doesn't happen in every city. The connection point for all these worlds is our shared humanity. To return to our friend, now headed for James Street. Most homeless people in the US are white males between 30 and 50, with quite a few reaching into their 60s. Aside from his race, this fellow fits the upper end of the bill, with his bald pate and sad eyes, red Adidas sweatpants today, gracing a hollow frame with no context. What is his story? Who once held this being in her loving mother's arms, and who used to value this man's company, his wit and soul? Did he dream of the great things he could one day accomplish, and still can? I won't find out tonight, because his toothless gums are vibrating against each other. His is a withdrawal so extreme he cannot speak, and can hardly control his muscles. They spasm quietly as we pass under the orange lights. Before, during, and after I greet him, his song is a funereal dirge of helpless groans, a repeating grunt I know from moments of extreme pain. He sits up front staring nowhere, unresponsive and moaning as I ask after his welfare and mention the weather, filling out the spaces with pleasant noise. I want him to feel welcome. Here we are now. Looks like 3rd and James. Made it here in one piece. That's him groaning. I'm not as good at it. I'm sorry. Let me get close to the curb for you. Pause. Did you want this one? Are you able to stand up okay? Can I help you stand? The faintest glimmer of recognition in his eyes for a fleeting moment. That's him in there. That's you. That's me. Let me help out. Make it a little easier. I'm just going to reach under your shoulder here and then we'll stand up together. Sound cool? I power him up gently. There you go, my friend. There it is. Okay. You take care tonight. Be careful now. And oh, don't forget your cup of coins there. Don't want to leave that behind. I'll see you again. All the while, disappearing into the shadowy recesses. Figures meld with each other in the low light. A dear friend of mine has a 6-year-old daughter, whom I consider a friend in her own right. One evening we were walking out to her car, and I was carrying little Athena, by now fast asleep. Into her dreaming ears I whispered, "You're one of my good friends, Athena. I love you very much." Nobody heard me. She definitely didn't. She was shifting in my arms in slumberland, busy making new memories. But there's a part of you that believes in some sort of osmosis, in the magic of things unknown, of stars and souls and moving time. I was yielding to this romantic notion, believing in her sleepy murmur, or the glimmer in the man's eyes. I doubt either of these two understood my words to them in the moment, but that's okay. I say the lines to be myself and to share, if not the literal meaning, the tone. Sometimes all that matters is the tone, a distant kindness from far away. Yep. Okay, questions. Alan?
I can't say how amazed. Every time I read one of your blogs, hear your insights, it just blows me away. And what blows me away is that somebody of your relatively young years, in your early 30s, has the wisdom and compassion and knowledge of someone twice your age. Where did that well of humanity come from?
I am not self-aware enough to answer that question. Thank you for thinking that I'm in my mid-30s, which is true. I tell my passengers I'm 17 and half of them believe me. I keep that up as long as I can. In answer to your question, I think anything good in me I've probably stolen from the people around me. I am fortunate to have excellent parents and friends, and if you're like the 5 people you hang around the most, you know, you try to surround yourself with good people and people that are more awesome than you, so you have to struggle to rise up to their level of greatness, and I don't know, I try to do something like that. Yeah. Mike and then Michaela.
Tell us about Paris.
What a great question. Yeah, I guess it's been a couple years. Every year they ask me to go back. So you may know that in November 2015, there was a large-scale terrorist attack in Paris that involved 6 sites and a lot of deaths. I was in that attack. And it was, I still don't have the, I can recall details, I can remember vivid moments. I'm not the best person to be able to say how it's changed my view. I do remember struggling with the randomness of political violence and other violence. And that story that we just read, the heavy one, is an attempt to wrestle with some of that. I remember turning 25, and I remember turning 30, and in both of those times, you get this feeling of there is not a lot of time. My active life is half over, and I want to do something useful with it. And Paris was another one of those wake-up calls. When I'm driving across the Aurora Bridge, where we remember that the old 359 had a fatality accident that involved the deaths or injuries of everybody on board, I think about that and I think, okay, I need to be totally okay with myself if that happens right now. And the way for me to do that, speaking only for myself, is to be trying to be the best version of myself, you know, like attempting to realize the better parts of what I'm able to do, hence the urgency to make a whole bunch of art, to be nice to people, and so on, to behave more on the sincerity side of the spectrum than the irony side. Yeah, I hope that answers some of the question. It's more interior than, you know, blood, yeah. Yeah, okay, Michaela, yes.
Oh, I'm curious to know what your take is on the impending switch to rapid ride for the number 7.
Yes. It would be enjoyable politically to be able to couch this as yet another example of the very real gentrification that is happening in that part of town, which makes me very sad. But it's a stretch. The route will basically be identical. The loss would be to the Prentice Street Loop. There would be a slight increase in service, especially at night. The thing that bothers me most is fare enforcement. I don't think that's an appropriate thing to have on Rainier Avenue, because a lot of the folks out there have more important things to worry about, and I'm grateful that the big cheese at Metro has actively moved on some things to try to make the penalties of fare enforcement be less severe, so that you are no longer, for example, disqualified from housing because you have a misdemeanor that has to do with you not paying fare. Now, I'm speaking for myself and not for Metro when I answer this question. I was recently interviewed by somebody, an online outlet, on this exact question pertaining to the 7. And I gave all these big, complicated answers, like the one I just gave you about, you know, it's kind of, sort of gentrification, but it's really not. And that's not what they wanted to hear. And they just took the first part of the first sentence where I said, oh yeah, it kind of is gentrification, and then they only use that. It's way more complicated. I'm gonna be sad because it'll split the 7 from the 49. And that single corridor, it's really important to keep that linked. And I'm gonna be sad when that, because a lot of people ride the through route, and it sort of functions as a light rail shadow from the U District to Rainier Beach, and it's nice to have that opportunity.
I think there was one other detail, I think it was you that mentioned, it must have been you that mentioned it, about the conversion to the rapid ride buses where people can access the bus from the rear door.
Oh my
And
gosh.
you lose that
Oh my goodness.
personal connection. right?
Oh. Okay, so one of my favorite routes is the 358. And I so miss it because driving the E-line on Aurora Avenue, the routing's identical, the stops are the same, but it's completely different. All the people that you need to be talking to and making eye contact with so you can defuse the space and make people feel happy are getting on through the very back door. Those are the people you need to be interacting with as a bus driver. Because when you make eye contact and say hi, you're stopping negative situations from happening even before they happen. I don't have that control as a rapid ride driver. And I'm at this job because I like talking to people. And when I ride the rapid ride, I don't use the front door because I want to get a seat. And so I use the other doors, and I can't blame other people for doing the very same. And that's something I miss. I was driving the 358 one day, and this was shortly after we had the implementation of the automated announcements, you know, where that voice comes on. She has a given name in computer coding parlance. It's Kate. When Kate makes all the announcements, it also contributes to a sort of impersonal environment. And I still make my own announcements. Some of us drivers still do that. And I was talking to this guy who just got out of a 3-year prison stint. He was on the 358, and he said, he came up at the end of the ride, and he was like, this bus ride felt so friendly, and I couldn't figure out why for the longest time. But then I realized, you're the only bus that still does a human voice. He went into prison before the installation of the automated announcements. When he came out, he couldn't figure out why every single bus felt so impersonal, and that was it. And there's value in a human voice, there's value in greeting people when they get on. These values are deprioritized by organizations that are trying to facilitate the movement of a lot of people very quickly, and so this type of stuff gets lost. There's an internal discussion right now about driver barriers. There's a small but vocal, I know, I feel the same. There's a small but vocal faction inside, actually the union, who wants very much to have drivers separated from passengers. And there's a few test coaches that are out there. I think there's 7 vehicles in service that have it. And it just breaks my heart. I hope those don't get implemented. I've done a lot of work trying to prevent those from getting implemented, but it's falling on deaf ears. And my strongest tool or weapon as a bus driver is good customer service, and that barrier limits my ability to use that tool, and it makes me feel less safe to be cooped up inside a metal box. We'll see what happens. Victoria?
Along those lines, can you tell people a little bit about Yellow Line Gate? Are you allowed to talk about it?
Am I allowed to talk about it? Paul, is this something we can talk about?
Of course.
Okay. So the yellow line at the very front of the bus, you know? I know. I respect other bus drivers who have different opinions than me. Please understand that. If all bus drivers were like me, nobody would ever pay bus fare, and this whole place would collapse. And it's important that there's drivers who have different outlooks than I do. But the yellow line on the bus, you're supposed to stand behind it. And I was on the coach procurement committee for a very short time. I was on it long enough to notice that the new purple trolley buses that were being ordered at the time had the yellow line shifted about 7 feet further back so that you would not in any way be able to ask the driver questions, talk to the driver. The trolley routes are among the busiest routes. They need room to hold lots of people. This limits that. Can you imagine being turned away because of the location of this arbitrary line? And I advocated very strongly for, like, we need to move this line back to where it is on every single other coach. And That met a lot of resistance. I was removed from the coach procurement team. And there was a lot of maneuvering to try to do something about that. At the time, we had a different general manager who was very enthusiastic about customer service, cared a lot about issues like this. The current GM also has a great attitude on customer service, but this guy was intense. And when he heard about it, because I contacted him directly, he immediately replied in extremely, in no uncertain terms, yelling down the necks of, these 5 people who are involved with moving the line, that it should be back up where it is. Myself and an attorney friend of mine found out the federal, legalese that actually defines where the yellow line is supposed to be on all buses. It's supposed to be parallel with the back of the driver's seat. It's not supposed to be moved further back. And it got moved back because people wanted to, I don't know, not talk to people. Mike, please.
Over Bellevue base.
Yeah, they're still there, the 7200s.
But I love it there
Uh-huh,
in the back,
uh-huh.
and then the 7300s, it's up front.
Yeah, because of me. And I'm sorry, but it's at the front spot on new buses now because myself and a couple other key people made a huge fuss about it, and that's just the way it is. I love you. Yes.
So I love the book. I think it's wonderful.
Thank you.
A short comment and a question
Yeah.
for you, actually.
Yeah.
So the short comment is, I love the book. I love listening to you read the stories. I hope that you consider doing an audiobook, because I think that's amazing.
Oh, wow.
But the question I have is actually about the design of the book. I love the way that the front flap of it looks like, like it's a schedule. Yeah, that's amazing. Could you talk more about the thinking behind the other side and the flap?
Oh boy. I love this question because the design is what I'm really passionate about. I like that I can bring a certain creativity to a solution to give kind of a visual form to your stories and to any writing that I happen to be working on. But this, I think, was particularly a fun challenge just because there's this built-in visual vocabulary that's in the public transportation system that I felt could be tapped into to kind of like your photographs, it gives your words context, that if people see this, well, a little backstory too, Metro has all its schedules on the website in PDF form, and you can download any of them and pick them apart in Illustrator and find out what fonts were used. So this is extremely accurate. And I found ways to justify stealing all that because of various government agencies and things like that. In any case, so one of my first ideas was to model it after a bus schedule. And I'd never done anything quite like this before, but I thought it would be neat to have a front cover that was the size of a bus schedule. And that way it could kind of reveal the pages below it. And so I kind of mocked this up in some little dummy books and realized real quickly that it would get dog-eared almost immediately because all these pages are exposed. So then I had an idea to extend the back cover into a flap that wrapped all the way around and tucked under and kind of gave the kind of punchline to the title on the flap as a way to kind of give some dimensionality, show off the photography and the map. It kind of tells an entire story in the composition. And there are kind of some unexpected bonuses, like you can use this back flap as a bookmark. If you don't like it, you can tuck it all the way away and it disappears. And then the title's still there.
Like you thought about this.
Oh,
Like you planned it.
extreme satisfaction from this. And none of this would have been possible if we had done it in a more conventional way. So the book was printed by Gurley Press, which is just a few blocks up the street. And they went out of their way to figure out how to actually do this, which was...
It's hard to do.
Yeah, it was extremely complicated because the way books are usually bound, after they're bound together in a book block, then the 3 sides are trimmed off. But I had this idea to make this weird flap thing, and it sticks out just enough that you can't trim the edges off. And so I'm pretty sure, I don't know exactly, but I think they had to fold each cover back, trim it by
Gosh.
hand, and then fold it back over. And they were just champions about it all, so we were really lucky to work with them on that.
Please, Quinn.
Is your design patented?
It is now, as of this moment.
Please, more thoughts. Yes,
Doug Freshen.
Doug, good evening, nice to see you.
I wanted to backstep a little bit about the yellow line. I know what you mean about not wanting to leave anybody behind.
Oh, yeah.
And I've had numerous occasions doing the 41 where the bus just gets stuck. And
Yeah.
people are in front of the line, they're packed in there, and you know it's full when somebody is standing there right at the railing and they look like they're on the front of a roller coaster.
Yeah.
And they're going down the street, and they're, you know, it's like, wow, this is neat. You know, but hopefully we won't have to hit the brakes because your face is gonna, hit the windshield. But,
Yeah, I remember reading a report from the mid-90s by Metro and stating a long-term goal that they hoped every Metro bus would one day be half full so that they had the capacity for more growth. Never gonna happen. Never. Impossible. Yeah.
So do you think the success of this book might affect your interactions with your passengers?
You know, that's a great question. I've wondered that about the success of the blog. The ridership on my route has less access to the internet, and the blog almost never comes up in conversation. I've been careful, even with that being the case, to make sure that I'm sitting on the side you want to sit on when it comes to like slander and libel. Nobody is described negatively. We present actions that have only taken place in a public sphere, where in Washington State there's sort of a legal consent. You have yourself photographed or written about if you're in a public space, and so on. I would be disappointed if the blog or book completely removed the truthful elements of what's going on. If all my interactions turn into conversations about the book, that would be fun, but it would not yield, it wouldn't like feed my soul, you know? I would need to go find some other route where nobody knows who I am. Yeah, that's a good question. You had your hand up a moment ago.
I did. You talked about fare enforcement.
Yeah.
And I very much appreciate the direction that's coming from the very top of Metro about trying to do fare enforcement in a way that balances revenue with equity and an understanding of the kind of long-term impacts that happen when things like bus fare become a criminal
Right, yeah.
incident. I was recently on a bus where there was some enforcement happening, and I thought the folks conducted themselves very well and with a lot of
Great.
empathy, but I was struck by how much shame it introduced to the bus in a way that just like put this horrible cloud over what had otherwise been
Yeah.
a perfectly pleasant series of interactions. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit about the role of fare enforcement.
You know, yeah, thank you for asking. It's a delicate issue in more than one way. In full-time class, they explained what is probably obvious, but the amount of money recovered by fare enforcement is less than the money that needs to be paid to fulfill the hourly wages of fare enforcement officers. So we all know transit operates at a loss to begin with. It's not a business, but that's exacerbated in this particular instance. It's extremely expensive, and it doesn't bring in revenue. It's a cost. And Metro is willing to eat that loss because most people do pay fare. And it's not the worst way to get revenue if 80% of your passengers are just volunteering to pay a couple of dollars. But it seems like a sort of ugly necessity, like that has to exist somehow. We're moving toward all-door boarding downtown for all routes. That implies fare enforcement for all routes, and that sounds very expensive. I don't know what's gonna happen there. Liz, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I remember riding a bus many years ago when a young woman didn't pay the fare and the driver just had such a tantrum about it.
Yeah,
And then later on I became a bus driver myself,
Yeah.
and I quit a couple months ago. But the new chief at North Base
yeah.
had this like one-on-one, what are your thoughts about Metro? And he asked me, what is the one thing, if you had any magical power, what's the one thing you would do to improve Metro? And I'd never thought about that before, but I just said, make it free.
Yeah.
Just remove the money, just
Yeah.
remove, it's.
Because as a percentage of total revenue, it's a paltry figure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and most bus drivers are pretty mellow about it, but there's a couple of them that are, I don't know if it's control issues or what, but.
It's hard to, it sounds easy when you're sitting in full-time class or we're here in this room, let it go, don't let stuff bother you. But when you're out there and you haven't eaten and you slept poorly and your body hurts because you're doing the equivalent of an 8-hour road trip every day, it takes a calculated amount of effort to be your best self. And there are times when people push you to the absolute limit, and whatever you don't like being called, that's what they call you. And it's in those moments that you have to be your best self. And it can be difficult. And I can understand certain operators not behaving in ways that they would probably later regret. But yeah, it makes everybody look bad. Yeah. Hi, please.
Regarding all-door boarding and the move to more all-door boarding in the downtown corridor and the lack of interaction with the bus driver,
Yeah.
but the desire to get more people on the bus, is there a better solution?
I don't know. I realize that my personal desire to interact with people and have friendly conversations is not as important as moving everybody. So I sort of yield to the powers that be must know a little more than I do. But I don't know what that solution would be. I remember in the waterfront streetcar when that still was around, there was a driver and a conductor. And that not only made things safer, not that anything ever happened on the waterfront streetcar, but it helps to have 2 staff members there sometimes. I don't know. That's my final answer to that. Yeah. Hi.
Hey, I know we all rely on bus drivers to help diffuse tense situations and resolve conflict on buses and advocate for a safe place for people. Have you seen examples of, in your experience, passengers kind of providing that same role or showing that?
Yes, and I love it. Especially on the 7 where there's such a strong sense of community. One of the reasons I like that route so much is the sense of togetherness and people knowing each other. There's research that indicates that the less safe a neighborhood is, the stronger the sense of community, because people have to rely on each other to be safe. And you hear people having conversations about each other's kids and stuff. And in that sort of environment, I don't have to do a lot. If somebody's misbehaving, I will have other people who will get rid of that person with a fair amount of enthusiasm and a lot more quickly than police or supervisors. And that's been really helpful. I'm thankful to it helps to establish these connections because you don't know if you're going to see this person again in an hour or if they have 5 brothers and you want to be nice to everybody. And I really like that. It takes a little bravery to be the first person to stand up and call someone out on misbehaving. But that's very important. What's really important is the second person who eliminates the bystander effect. It takes some courage to be that first person, but the second person is what makes it entirely legitimate for everybody to just get in there. Yeah. Hi.
You mentioned a little bit earlier thoughts about the 5, but then you didn't finish.
Yes, thoughts about the 5. What a great time to talk about this. So I love driving the 7 for all these reasons I've explained. And But I have all these other things in life that I love to do. Film, I'm in post-production on a film right now, photography, darkroom stuff, writing the blog, and all of that takes a lot of time. For all these blog entries, it takes like 4 hours, and the last paragraph of any one of these stories is me sitting there for 45 minutes deciding exactly what am I trying to express here. All of that takes time. And I had these really good shifts on the Nighttime 7 that were short, and I sat on them for years. In fact, and due to a contractual change, a lot of the work got reblocked. All those shifts are gone. And if I wanted to be doing the 7 and 49, I would have to be working about 10 hours every evening. And I don't want to work 10 hours, I want to work 8. And what was available to do for 8 hours and no more was the 5. And so I happily drive the 5 and 21, and I don't want to complain about work that's easy, because that work is so easy. It's such a mellow crowd, and I am surprised at the amount of people who are in a position to take care of themselves, because it's something of a surprise. It's amazing, it's great, but it doesn't feed my soul. I don't feel like I don't feel the same sense of belonging, of acceptance, when I'm driving through, let's just say what we're all thinking, affluent white neighborhoods that lack community. I get a lot more out of having conversations and talking to people who don't have headphones in. And the 5 is pleasant. Some great people on there. I have some great conversations. The 21, the same. But gosh, it's not the 7. My second choice would have been the E-line. Incredibly, the good E-lines were gone when I got there. I'm not sure why. Usually I'm the first person to pick these types of routes, especially for the night shift, because nobody at my seniority level is interested in this level of overwork. Quinn.
Tom, how many other designs or formats for the book did you play with before you settled on this very unique one?
This idea came about pretty early on, and it was actually a lot of fun to work with Nathan on it, because we were really supportive of any weird idea that I had. And
the amount of time we spent on choosing this shade of green. We sat there at 3rd and Union watching buses drive by and looking at what color green they were.
This is true. And then I think there was a display of greeting cards nearby. We could actually pick them out like swatches and compare it to the buses driving by. And then I could bring that back to the computer and figure out what it was. So it feels like the solution to the book's design came about really naturally and really easily. So it's a good experience.
Alan.
Do you see a time when all of your art, your film, your writing comes together, enables you to live off of it when you will start writing?
So I was at Town Hall and I was listening to Philip Glass. He wasn't doing music, but he was giving a Q&A because he just released his memoirs. And so we're doing this Q&A with Philip Glass, and everybody's asking all these sort of Q&A questions, like, do you ever get writer's block, or what inspires you? Thank you, by the way, for asking such incredibly specific and detailed questions. I love it. And finally, some guy gets up and asks Philip Glass, what would you recommend to a young musician who's trying to make it in the world of music? And Philip Glass sat there for a long time, and then said, get a job, preferably not in the arts, not in music, so that you have the freedom to make whatever your art needs to be, because art is, you should be making the art for yourself. And this is not what the music grad student wanted to hear. And I am thankful for this job that I ran a wedding photography business with a friend of mine for about a decade. And it was work. And because it was work and it was grueling, it sucked the joy out of it completely. And when, we all have a lot of energy, but sometimes we don't know where to put it. And when you know where to put it because you have a passion for photography or whatever else, it's awful when your passion stops being a passion. And this bus driving is a way of me protecting the filmmaking, the photography, the writing, so I have complete creative control and can create things that are satisfying to me And I want to keep that a little bifurcated. It's pretty pleasant that the bus driving translates well into writing and into the book. I didn't foresee that. But I'm very thankful that I'm not working in photography or film because I love it so much. Yeah. Yes.
I kind of a two-part question. So,
I love two-part questions. Please remember both parts because I might forget the second one.
The first one is, so part of why I'm like an avid Uber taker.
Yeah.
Because I did a lot of riding the bus in the this last couple of years, and a part of the reason why I stopped is because I'm very sensitive to energy.
Okay.
So, do you ever feel like you need to do like a lot of self-care from this job, like being around so many different types of energy? And my second question is, you mentioned that like at 25 you felt kind of like a pressure to make the most out of time. What would you say now to your 25-year-old self?
Wow. Okay, I'm going to answer the first question now because I don't have an answer yet to the second question, but I will in 2 minutes. The self-care thing. There's a driver who I very much admire who is really careful about who he talks to at the base before he goes out on the road. He sort of keeps to himself and has his like quiet preparation time before he goes into the breach. And I do that too. I find myself like retreating to the upper floor where the lockers are and hiding and reading my book or something before going out there to be social because we're all impressionable, and if I am treated with an avalanche of negative energy before starting my shift, it's not helpful. And as for when I'm already out there and stuff is happening, it's interesting to notice the ineffable way that the ephemeralities of my positive energy or negative energy gets picked up on by people. When I feel particularly excited and happy to be there, like more than normal, people pick up on that and they'll come up at the end and say, "Thank you for your positive energy, that was really great." I don't think I'm doing anything different than I normally am, but there's something they can grasp. I had I hope this isn't too personal, but I was in a problematic relationship many years ago, and once it ended, I got a slew of commendations from passengers who must have been able to sense that I was so much happier. And when I'm having a difficult day on the route, I realize it's actually because of something going on in my life. All this stuff that happens out here on the street is the same, but it's whatever viewpoint I'm bringing to it. I hope that answers your question. In answer to the 25-year thing and what I would say to the 25-year-old person, okay, I still don't really have a great answer for that 2 minutes later. Somebody asked me several years ago, what would I want to be doing in 5 years? And my answer 5 years ago was exactly what I'm doing now, but on a larger scale. And that's what's ended up happening, and I'm super thankful. A bunch of things have happened to me in the last few years that I could never have predicted. I don't think I would want my 25-year-old self to know that those things were in the pipeline. It's in the nature of life that we only get to live it once. Perfecting something means doing something more than once. That's something you cannot do with life. It's inherently an imperfect mass, and I don't think I would want to change that because I can't really imagine it. Yeah. I saw hands. Thoughts? Yes, you had a question, yeah.
Since you work in two different media, visual arts and then
Yeah.
arts, I wondered how it connects for you, or are there tensions for you in resolving how to handle story?
sometimes I wish that I could strap a camera to my head or somehow document with more immediacy than the written word can offer what's going on. But it's impossible. The moment you introduce cameras, people's behavior changes. The Seattle channel was filming me one day, and the camera guy was pretty proactive and not shy about getting the camera really in people's faces. And everyone was so quiet. This was on the 7, and all these like kids who would normally be really loud in the back and stuff, they're all quiet, they're not making a sound because there's this like huge official camera staring at them. And so I don't really know how to combine those two elements. As for the sort of inherent dichotomy of the art world and the street world, I like driving through Pioneer Square on First Thursday in the 7 that's filled with all of my street people, and then seeing all the folks outside, like with cocktail dresses and glasses of wine, who I also recognize. And being in those two worlds is very exciting, and I don't really know how to combine them because it too often turns into the act of looking at the other, and there's got to be a way to bridge that. I haven't figured it out. There's a great scene in the French movie La Haine where the 3 main characters who are sort of young street thugs find themselves at a fine art gallery, and their appraisal of the environment is both more outrageous but also more perceptive than anything that the other people are seeing or saying. And it's amusing. But yeah, I'm gonna think about that now. It's the next time I see you, I'll have a better answer. I'm gonna mull over it. Okay.
I have a brief anecdote, and then
Yeah.
I think we'll probably wrap it up and we'll book signing afterwards, I believe.
Yes, please ask me more questions over there.
So on
All these other people aren't listening.
So a lot of the books that we printed are just in boxes in our houses. It's not a warehouse kind of situation. And on Thanksgiving Day of last year, we were having, at my house, we were having a big group of people over and doing kind of an orphan Thanksgiving of people from out of town. I don't know if you remember, but it was pouring down rain. And Nathan had texted me to see if he could get a couple extra books to give to friends. And I said, well, sure, I can come meet you somewhere, or we can figure out a way to arrange that. And he told me that, oh, well, I'm driving a bus through Ballard. I'm up in Ballard. And the 40 is going to go right by, well, I realized that the 40 goes right by where I live. And I thought, well, great, I can just come out to the bus stop and give you a box of books, and
It'll be
you can be on your
perfect.
way.
Yeah.
And so you texted me like 6 different times that you'd be going back and forth, passing that same stop. And I realized this is on Thanksgiving Day. It's dark early, it's pouring rain. And so I went out and I brought a big box of books and I stood at the bus stop with my umbrella, like Totoro or something. And it was dark, nobody was on the street, and here comes the bus, and I know it's Nathan's bus, and it stops, and of course you greet me with a big smile, and I get on the bus and I ride for a few stops. I realized everybody's at the front of the bus. It's like your whole family and friends were kind of at the front of the bus, and I don't know that they were your family or friends, but it felt like this little moving Thanksgiving family-friendly fest. And I just like to imagine that's kind of following you around everywhere that you go in the city.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for being here. Stick around, I'm not going anywhere. I want to talk to you. There's a bunch of books back there. Thank you for supporting something positive. I never thought this would be as well received as it is. Thanks for coming out tonight.